So we're going to talk a little bit about these mental models, right? So part of our rationale for understanding like how to work with diversity, it is we do make some assumptions, right? So what we know, the head, the heart, and the hand, and we know that those three things can have different motivations, right? So some people know what they should do, but then they don't necessarily do it, right? I'm sure there was a chore or something that your parents would have for you, and you knew you were supposed to do it, but there was something in between you doing it and knowing you're supposed to do it versus actually doing it, right? And one of those things is the heart. But we also know that the heart can feel things that aren't related to what we end up doing, right? So I can feel a certain kind of way about a thing, but that doesn't mean I'm going to change what I do. I know I shouldn't feel a certain kind of way about a thing, but I still do. So we're going to talk about those things. And the things that inform what the head, the heart, and the hand do, how they're actionable, we'll refer to those as mental models. So many of us, this was really interesting. So I do community mediations for a place called Community Mediation and Restorative Services in Crystal. And so what we end up doing is a lot of times the mediations that I'm doing is between like a big box store and a kid, where the kid has stolen something, and the store doesn't want to necessarily prosecute the kid, but they want something done. And so what we do is we mediate. And so I act as the representative of the store, and we come up to some alternative to adjudication for this young person. So they do service hours, they do all sorts of stuff. They understand what they did, they work to fix it, right? So restorative justice meaning they really try to restore the harm that they caused. And so we go through this whole thing. And I'll never forget, I had a parent, parents and a child and myself, and I was the mediator for this particular thing. And so they were probably like Ukrainian or Russian or something like that. And that matters, but it doesn't matter. But it just kind of gives you a picture of who I'm dealing with, right? So I'm sitting here talking to these folks, and later I found out some things about the parents, right? So I thought it was a married couple, but they weren't married. This was the boyfriend that was who presented himself in this thing as the parent, right? Which that is whatever it is. I don't have anything to say about that, right? Other than to bring it up because it brings to this other point. It comes up later in this other point. And the mom kind of went along with that thing. And so the boy was, the young man was brought in, and the father was a police officer. So that was the other thing, right? So he was a police officer. So, and I found this after the fact, like after this mediation thing had happened. So we're sitting down talking, and the problem was that the young boy had stolen an iPhone from somebody at school. Now, how many folks have iPhones? All right, cool. Now, even Google does this now. So if Android phones, right? So if you lose your phone and you have an Android phone, what do? What's that? You do the Find My Phone app, right? If you have an an iPhone, you do a similar thing, right? Or you can lock your phone, you can actually just shut the whole thing down, right? So if they do anything with your phone, blah, blah, blah. For whatever reason, this middle schooler didn't get that this is a function. And in both of those phones, what else can you do other than just shut your phone down? You can locate, you can find that phone, right? So you can find exactly where it is. So if somebody is taking it and they're not as savvy as you are, you can at least know where your phone is, even if you can't or don't want to go get it, right? So you can at least know where it is. So this kid didn't understand all that stuff, so he stole it from he stole a phone from somebody at school and took it home. Well, the kid's dad showed up at his house. Where's my phone? Now, the dad who's showing up on somebody's, that's a bit extreme, right? But also not knowing that, you know, this kid was not a good criminal, right? So now the dad is at the house, and now there's a confrontation between the parents. So that's how they ended up in me. So we're having this conversation. And so I asked this question, and I was actually surprised by the answer. I asked the young man, I said, what did your parents teach you about stealing? That was my question. Guess what his response was? We never talked about it. Guess who else is in the room? The parents. And guess what they confirmed? They had never talked about it. And I'm like, what? So when we talk about these mental models and stuff like that, we can't make assumptions about what people know or don't know, right? So that's the first place that we'll start. We'll start with the fact that people operate from mental models. Now, where does the need to have a mental model arise? What gives the need to even have a paradigm, a way of seeing the world? What's the stage that sets a need to have a mental model? What do you think? What sets the stage? Why do people have a mental model? Why do they have a paradigm, a way of seeing the world? Why is that necessary? What drives the need for that? Yes.
The brain kind of likes to take shortcuts, and it's easier to say, okay, this is going to be this way all the time, and just come to expect things, so I don't have to think about it. So
one is the brain likes shortcuts, right? And the shortcuts that the brain chooses to take is its interpretation of what? Because there are certain ones that it takes, and then there's certain ones it doesn't take, right? So what determines what shortcuts the brain wants to take or takes? Society, values, knowledge, familiar and unfamiliar things. What do we call those things? Familiar and unfamiliar starts with con and ends in text. Context, right? So mental models are designed to help the brain adapt to particular contexts. So if you see me do this a lot, it really means ratio. So I'm really about like this ratio, not a plus or minus, but really in relationship to other things. So one of the things that we'll talk about is this idea of, well, no, let me back up. So Monday, we talked a little bit about affirmative action and reverse discrimination, right? So I want to put a capstone on that conversation because the young lady said something very interesting. She had a 3.84. But we know that 4.0 is the best, right? So she had an expectation that she could get the best with something that was good. That's problematic, right? The other part, and we'll talk more about this reverse discrimination stuff in today's lecture as well, is that sometimes people say, well, I did not get this, that, or the other thing because they gave it to another group or another minority. Has anyone ever heard stories like that where people have said similar things? They did not get because somebody else did, right? How many people have ever applied for a job? If you've ever applied for a job, please raise your hand. All right, cool. Did you get every job you applied for? No? Okay, so some people can say yes, they did. the majority of us, I would probably say no, we didn't, right? So those of you who have not gotten every job you apply for, please raise your hand. I just want to see, be clear. All right, cool. So I just want to address this to you for right now, right? So for those of you who've not gotten every job that you've applied for, when you did not get the job, did you get a letter or email or a call that sounded something like this? Unfortunately, we are glad that you have applied. Unfortunately, we have selected another candidate that had more skill, fit the qualifications better, and we will hold your letter of interest or resume until another time. We thank you for applying. Have a good day. Good night. Right? Anybody get something similar to that? I mean, some kind of version of that. Yeah. How many folks got letters when you get denied? Raise your hand if you got a letter. Okay, cool. Anybody get emails? Yeah, when you get denied, right? Anybody get denied on a phone call? That's crushing. Like, how did it? What job was that?
It's just a nanny job. We decided to go with the nanny that's already married kids before.
Okay, cool. So, in that case, that's appropriate, right? But I was thinking, like, Target, and they're like, no, we don't want you. No, that's appropriate, right? That's appropriate. So how is it that people who say that I did not get the scholarship because they gave it to blah, 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 how do they know that? Like, have you ever been turned down for a scholarship or just didn't get it? Did they tell you, we didn't give the scholarship because we gave it to somebody else who was da, 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 da. No, in my experience, that has never been the case. So how do they know these things? And you'll also hear adults say, well, I didn't get that promotion because da, 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 da. Here's something that I want you to hold in your head. Is it possible that the people who are saying those things are not telling the truth? They're not telling the truth. Or that they could be misguided in thinking that a 3.8 is actually the same as a 4.0. Could that be that they could be a bit misguided? Right? If we can make that assumption, then that clears up a lot of stuff for us, right? So the feeling that some of those folks had in that video that white people are the new oppressed group, even if it feels real, do all of your feelings manifest in reality? Do they necessarily reflect reality? I would say no. There was a time when I would have wine Sundays, right? And my friends and I would get a bottle of wine and we get cheese and crackers, and that's what we would do in the afternoon. And I will tell you that after you drink a whole bottle of wine, you feel a whole lot different than you do after the bottle is gone. So to that point. So affirmative action is supposedly, or people like to talk about affirmative action as a holdback program or something like that. Have you heard people talk about it in those terms? That it's a special program for so-called minorities, that they set aside jobs for those minorities. You may have heard that kind of thing, or scholarships, or school applications, right? That they hold certain things. So if we have 100% of our organization, be it a college, be it a scholarship fund, be it a job. If we're going to do an affirmative action program, as it is oftentimes talked about, which is a holdback program, right? So that we're going to hold out for these people. What percentage? I have raw information, so I can give you some. I can backfill some of the stuff for you. But if you were running a company or a scholarship program or whatever, you were going to engage in this affirmative action program, what percentage would you hold for so-called minorities? Would it be 5%, 10%, 20%, 50%? 80%, 90%, 100%? What would you say?
I'd say probably proportionate for growing society.
Okay, so proportion to broader society, that's a great way to look at it. So what would that proportion be, to particularly in Minnesota? The so-called minority groups to the general population of folks, what would you say? Are we 50-50 in the state of Minnesota? Are we? No, we're not 50-50 in the state of Minnesota. State of Minnesota looks just like this classroom. So what would you say is the demographics of this classroom?
Isn't it 70-30?
I wish it was 70-30.
90-10.
Close 90-10. More like 95-5. Right? So let's go with that. Let's go with 90-10, right? So we're going to have a hold that position of 10. So we're going to hold 10% of positions, which now means what? So what's available? 90% is available. So 90 is available, 10 is set as a set aside. When people say, oh, here's a good example. So LeBron James, is he a pretty decent basketball player? Would you say? I mean, anybody? Is he a pretty decent basketball player? Yeah. All right. Cool. I'm better than LeBron. I wish LeBron James would come in here and try to play basketball against me. I wish he would. He better not show up and play basketball against me. And I can say that. Why? Because he would never care. So I'm saying that I'm being boastful in those ways, right? And then, lo and behold, this who walks down the hallway and into my classroom, ducking in. LeBron James, he says, let's go play basketball. What do I say? Oh, I didn't bring my shoes. Oh, I got a hamstring. Oh, I'm starting to make all sorts of excuses. Why? Before I was talking smack. But why am I now having all these excuses? Because I'm not as good as I've been telling people I am. So here's an interesting thing. When you hear people talk about affirmative action, you hear them talk about scholarship stuff, is either they are misguided or they are not willing to tell the truth. Because who are they competing against for all of these opportunities? Are they competing against the lowest number or the highest number? The highest number. And when they can't get it with the highest number, who do they blame? The lowest number, as opposed to doing what? Asking, maybe I'm just not cut out for that. Maybe I'm not as good as I think I am. So when the alt-right and the neo-Nazis start all this bantering, part of their problem is that they're misguided, or they may not be willing to tell the truth. May not be willing to tell the truth. And so that's where these mental models start to kind of come in, right? So there's this idea of implicit biases. Have people heard of implicit bias? This concept of implicit bias? Okay, so what is that? What is implicit bias? As you've experienced it or talked about it. Yes.
It's when you have certain biases towards another group of people or another thing without you necessarily like explicitly thinking it. You just kind of have an internal bias within you that's been built in you for however long.
Do we have bias? Okay. Okay, so what creates that bias? Or where is that bias found to be most useful? Why do we have bias? Yes. Survival.
I think like representation in media is really important, just because like especially in this day and age, like that is something that we're struggling with the time, and so when we see a certain group of people like being uplifted in the media compared to another, it will automatically like have an association with that.
Yes, right. Where is bias created and where is it best served? It is all. Your context creates the bias itself. So whatever context you're in, you automatically have bias, right? So I would also offer that this blind spot, we did the no, you don't know, all that stuff. Remember that when we did that paradigm thing? That this blind spot is also contextual, which is also the foundation for this bias. Now, here's the thing about bias. It is not necessarily good or bad. Bias isn't good or bad. So an example of bias, right? So I walk down the street. It's 11 o'clock at night. I'm by myself. There's 6 guys walking down the street towards me. What decision do you think I make at 11:30 at night? 6 guys, me by myself. What do I do? I'll go to the other side of the street. And what would you call that? What would you say that was? What's that?
Would it be fear?
It could be fear, but when I get home and I haven't been hassled, what do you call that? What do you say that was? That was smart. I was smart, right? Why? Because I'm protecting myself, right? Now, given that context, was that a good decision? Was it possibly a good decision? Yeah, most folks would say it was possibly a good decision. Now, does that mean as I'm walking down, let me finish the rest of the story. Let me get ahead of myself. So now I'm at the Mall of America. I'm walking down an aisle on my way to Nordstrom's rack. 6 guys are walking towards me. If I change my aisle because those 6 guys are coming towards me, what would you say about my behavior? That I'm paranoid. But wait a minute, it's the same behavior, different context, right? So different context. So when we talk about this idea of bias, we have to recognize that our bias is contextual. And as the context changes, so should our bias. What do prejudiced people do? They keep the same bias for every context. So as those things change, so bias isn't good or bad. Now, I just protected myself. Now, if I try to use that same walking across the street thing, if I start using that for every situation that I'm in, then that's inappropriate. There's something wrong with me. I am in fact paranoid, right? So bias. So this idea of implicit bias is these things that you're not aware of. What I would suggest is that, and I don't know what this line of logic is called. So anybody who's taking a logic class, if you can help me figure out what the name of this logic is. This is a logic that says if it works in this context, it should work in other contexts. Right? So if it works in this one, it should work in blah, blah, blah. So implicit bias is supposedly bias that we're not aware of, right? Did your parents ever give you, a punishment or a timeout for a rule that they had that you said you didn't know? Did anyone ever get a punishment or sent to your room for that? Okay, so Apparently your parents thought they made it clear what the thing was, but you said you didn't recognize them teaching you that or that expectation. Why did you still get a punishment if, in your mind, you didn't think that they actually were clear about that? Why did you still get a punishment from your parents?
Just because you don't know doesn't mean it's not wrong.
Just because you don't know doesn't mean it's not wrong. So this idea of implicit bias is a great concept if I don't want to take what? Responsibility. Yes, implicit. I didn't know. I have this boogeyman in the back of my head. I was raised in a context where we didn't blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, as human beings, what do we say about our choices and our behaviors?
We have control.
Not only do we have control, but we take responsibility for those things. So if in fact I do have implicit bias, then I need to take cognitive control of those things. Your car has blind spots. We can talk all day about whose fault it is if they have blind spots, blah, blah, blah. But if you want to drive that car, what do you have to take responsibility for? Checking those blind spots, bless you. Checking those blind spots, right? Checking those blind spots. So when we talk about implicit bias, that's cool. We can talk about that, right? There's all this psychological stuff, but ultimately, I don't really care if you have blind spots or not. What I do care about is, do you have control over them? So, anyone here afraid of spiders? Okay. You may be afraid of snakes? Okay, cool. So let's say you're in a business meeting of your dream job, and they're doing some demonstration, and one of the persons has a snake in the demonstration, right? Or a spider snake. Ooh, that would be worse, right? A spider and a snake together, right? So they have it, and it's in a cage, and it's sitting there, and they're talking about it and that kind of stuff. Do you lose your cool? No. Why?
They can't get out.
Because it can't get out. What else? You want the job, right? So ultimately, you want the job, and you're sitting there, and you're like, okay, I don't like the spider snake thing. It's weird to have the two together, like mixed together, genetic, whatever. And you're sitting there like, whoa, that's weird. So what do you do to make sure that you're able to keep the job? Even though you're freaked out by it, but what do you do? What's going on in you? So you see past it. So how do you see past it?
You kind of think about the bigger goal of what you're there for.
Yeah, you think about the bigger goal, right? Like I ultimately, I'll get this $300,000 job. I'll be able to, go to Europe for, Christmas vacation. You think of all this great stuff beyond the little snake spider thing that's freaking you out because that's, right? What else are you saying? So you're looking long term at that. Yes.
You tell yourself why you shouldn't be afraid.
Yeah, you tell yourself why you shouldn't be afraid, right? I shouldn't be afraid because it's in the box. Obviously, the person who's handling knows what it's doing. Blah 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 blah. Right? So you start doing what is known as self-talk. So how do you start getting this cognitive control? You look at the long-term vision and you start self-talk. So you start talking to yourself. Okay, this is how it's going. You rehearse what all the good stuff is that's coming out and blah 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 blah. So let's say the person is doing the presentation. They accidentally knock the lid off of the snake spider thing, and now it's in the room. What do you do when you want to keep this $300,000 job? Save your boss. That sounds like a movie, right? No, save you, right? No, what do you do? You start strategizing, like, okay, first of all, let me see, is there a cool way I can get out of here without like freaking everybody out? Let me pick my feet up off the ground. Let me, can I put to kind of block me and you start problem solving a lot of these things, right? So although you may have this bias, this implicit bias, you start problem solving. You guys are good. Start problem solving how you can take that problem into control. Right? We talked a little bit about reverse discrimination, and in fact, that there is no such thing as reverse, but we should be talking about discrimination. The other thing that we also have to recognize is that although people may be misguided or aren't willing to tell the truth about their actions, we have to understand that what are they trying to get by saying that they are experiencing discrimination? They're trying to get safety, significance, and belonging. They just may not necessarily know the appropriate ways to get those things. You can feel discriminated against and it not be true, right? So, and we'll get to that when we get to this piece, because discrimination oftentimes isn't what people think that it is, and we'll talk about that. Then there's this conversation about diversity meaning lower standards. That if we increase diversity, we'll have to lower our standards, and that's not true. That's not true. Sometimes you'll hear people talk like that. Bless you. Anybody here use a slide rule? You guys know what a slide rule is? Okay, cool. So before my time, so when my parents were in high school, they had this like ruler type thing that they would take this thing and they would slide it back and forth for calculations and all sorts of stuff. It was like the calculator of their time. A little bit after the abacus. Right. Right. So the slide rule. Now, we don't use slide rules today. Why? Because we have calculators, we have better technologies, we have phones. I'm looking for a phone right now that all it does is just call. Can't find one. They do all these other things too, right? So we don't use a slide rule. So does that mean because technology requires something different, our context requires something different, does this mean that because we're not using slide rules, that we have now lowered our standards for things? No, it doesn't. It just means that we recognize that the context requires different kinds of tools. So when people say that diversity lowers the bar, I would suggest that we say that diversity just changes what the bar means. It doesn't lower the bar, it just changes what the bar means, right? So, back in the day, it was what the 3 R's, reading, writing, and I don't know how they got the A. They skipped the A and went straight to the R with arithmetic, but I guess they needed something with alliteration, right? So the 3 R's. Are those, in today's society, are the 3 R's limited? Are the things that students need to know limited to those 3 R's? No, they don't, right? They need to have media literacy these days, right? They need to know how to negotiate conflict in a peaceful way. So diversity doesn't lower standards, it just changes what those standards mean. And then micro inequity. Have folks heard that word before? Okay. So I see some people nodding, some people know. So micro obviously means what? Small, little, tiny, right? Inequity. So what is equity? What does that word mean? Equity. We'll start there. What is equity? It's about values, okay? Which one is, well, I'll just- so this is diversity. So that's diversity. So what would you call this? Equality. Yeah, equality. Would be what's the difference between this one and this one? Right. So based on, so equality is everyone gets the same thing. Equity is people get what they need, right? So, you know, the metaphor goes, if there's a fence, you know, everybody gets what they need to be able to see over the fence. So diversity is the mix of different people. Equity is everybody getting the same thing. And then, I mean, equality is everybody getting the same thing. And then equity is people getting what they need, right? So when we talk about micro inequities, we know that in means not, right? So these are small things that are not making people feel equal. They're not making people feel like they have what they need, right? So micro inequities. An example is, you did that pretty good for a girl. Does that raise your humanity, those of you who are female? No, it doesn't. As a matter of fact, it makes you want to punch me in the nose, right? Yeah, I didn't know Hmong people could make that happen like that. Really? Okay. You people are really good dancers. Are those comments lifting humanity? Does somebody feel, right? No, those are all microaggressions. Now, or microaggressions that end up being micro inequities. And so there's this rate, the ratio on the other side of this is there are micro inequities on the side. These are all small little things that you can't sue. So I can't sue someone for making a comment like that, right? But if somebody touches me, can I sue? I mean, do I have a case, right? Yeah. So what do we call that? So I'm walking down the hallway and somebody, and we're not on the softball team together, right? What do we call that? Sexual harassment or harassment. Sexual harassment or harassment. So that's something I can do something about. These micro inequities are those things that make you go, did they really say that? Oh, did I, right? It makes you think, right? But it diminishes how people feel about their humanity. So as micro inequities go up, discretionary effort goes down. And discretionary effort, what does discretionary mean? What is discretionary?
Is it the way you interpret something?
So is it the way you interpret something? Okay, cool. All right, anybody have a budget? Do you have a budget that you or it's people started laughing like, budget? Right? No, I mean, even if it's loose, right? So you don't have unlimited dollars, right? So you have to allocate your dollars in a certain kind of way, right? So typically, what is okay, we get in trouble. All right, so typically, in terms of how you manage the funds that you have access to, what should you be doing first? Okay, so saving, all right. Oh, okay, calculating what you have. All right, cool. I would say pay yourself first, right? So you get some more money for yourself on the side, and then you save, and then you probably pay bills. Anybody pay bills, right? Okay, cool. You pay bills with that money, and then if you have anything left over, what do you do with that? So some people say they spend it. Buy food. So you can spend it, you can buy food. You can give it to the church, right? What else? What else could you do with it? You can save it, put more into savings, right? Whatever you have left after you've done all your other stuff is up to your discretion. You can do whatever you want with that because it's up to your discretion. So when we talk about discretionary effort, is that a job will pay you. Give them 75%, do you think they'll still give you a check? More than likely, right? Now, if you consistently do 75% or you drop down to 50% of your effort and you come in late and you're not giving all your best, blah, 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 they're not going to keep doing that, right? But if you give at least 75%, more than likely they'll keep you, right? Now, what does your job want from you every single day? They want 100%. But they'll pay you for 75%. So between 75 and 100% is up to you what you want to give, which is now your discretion. So your discretionary effort. So if people's discretionary effort is going down, what might be something I want to look for, either as a teacher, as an administrator, as a business person, and I'm watching people not want to give their 100%, but they keep sliding down. What things might I want to look for? Are there micro-inequities going on? Do people not feel safe in my organization, in my classroom? Right? What might be some things that are people telling? So here's a good one. So Oli and Lena jokes. Anybody ever heard Oli and Lena jokes? All right, cool. Does anybody have one? Anybody have an Oli and Lena joke going to jail? Or Sven and Oli? Anybody got one? Come on, somebody's got one. Good one. No, only Elena jokes, no Sven and Oli, or you remember? Give me one you remember. Even if you can't remember the whole thing, give it to me. Okay, so it was in 5th grade.
No.
Okay. Anybody else? Here's my point with that. That even with Oli and Lena jokes, they seem somewhat benign. If you change Oli and Lena to a blonde and a brunette, it starts to take on a different kind of feel, right? Or a Pollock. Starts to feel a little different, right? Or a Jew. Or a wetback. Or a blah, blah, blah. Even those Oli and Lena jokes that seem very benign, if we're not careful, they impact people's discretionary effort. So in my workplace, people are cursing. In cursing environments, does that cursing encourage people to give 100%? I would suggest no. Some other people will say, well, we're just letting off steam, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, that's cool, but that's not the environment that is enriching people to say, you know what, I can give my best if they're being called a blank blank every so often. Those jokes, those are all examples of micro-inequities. We also understand that there is a fake racial orthodoxy oftentimes in play. That anyone ever seen the show Blackish? Blackish. I have a love-hate relationship with that show. Sometimes I think is funny and cutting edge, and other times I think it's just bad old shtick. And I've written both the lead actors to give them my, what I think about it. They haven't changed anything, but I did my part, right? So there's this Christmas episode where the guy who had been in the Christmas pageant had died. He was the Santa Claus for years at this company, and so the dad goes up to the boss and he says, "Look, now the Santa Claus was a white guy, a big white guy, like Santa Claus, right? And so the protagonist in the show is a black father of a family, and so he goes up to his supervisor and says, "Look, I know that so and so died, and he was going to do the Santa pageant, but I want you to think differently about Santa this year. I want you to be open-minded about who could possibly be Santa." Right? And all the time, what's he building? Who's he trying to build up? Himself, right? So he's trying to plug himself in the same. So he says to the guy, just think about that, blah, 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 blah. And the guy was like, you know what? I wasn't going to think like that, but now that you brought it up, I am. And he said, well, I guess I'll make my announcement at lunch. So at lunchtime, everybody's around the water cooler. It gets everyone's attention. And he says, I just want to say that the new Santa Claus for this year's pageant is Juanita Lopez from HR. The black guy goes nuts. He was like, what are you doing? What are you talking about? He was like, the supervisor was like, I did what you suggested. I thought outside of the box. I looked at, all the possible people who could be Santa Claus, and so I picked Juanita. And the black guy goes, hey, you just broke the rule. The guy's like, what rule? He's like, everybody knows. First it's a white guy, then it's a black guy, then it's a woman, and then it's a Mexican. And that's how he talked in the thing, right? So he supposed that there was some racial orthodoxy that said that there was the best or the next, and then all these things were supposed to play out, when in fact, we have to recognize that there is no racial orthodoxy because there is no race, that is all made up. And so even that hierarchy of what's good and what's bad and what's best and all that thing is all made up. So these mental models have to be taken into consideration, have to be taken seriously. A couple of other things I want to just mention on that's on your paper so that we walk away without London fog. This idea of critical race theory, and a number of ways in which we're approaching this class are based on critical race theory. And so what critical race theory simply is using the law or understanding the law and its impact on race and how it produces social structures. So critical race theory is made up of those three pieces. It's the law, it's looking at the construct of race, and the social structures that are made out of that combination. It is critical race theory. This idea of white supremacy, has anyone ever heard of that concept? Right? I don't necessarily adopt the idea that white supremacy is a concept, but I can talk more about that at another time. But what I do want to offer you is that white supremacy is based on the notion of scarcity, the notion of fear, and it is connected to whiteness, right? So when you hear people talk about white supremacies or white supremacists, part of their thing is fueled by fear, and that their whiteness is not getting them some resources that they should be getting. What I think is more problematic is white primacy, and as opposed to white supremacy. White primacy is that whiteness, the concept of whiteness, should be the center of everything, which is way more pervasive than just white supremacy. White supremacy suggests that I think I'm the best. What white primacy says that white is, and nothing else is, right? So let's say white primacy. The last thing, we'll talk about oppression and that kind of stuff. Intersectionality, you can mostly read that, is the notion that we're not just one thing, but there are a number of times when oppressions intersect. And that's a better way for us to look at both oppression as well as our privilege. And then we're done. I will see you guys on Monday. There's a lot of notes today, so I hope you get a hand cramp.
Keeps me awake. Yeah.